18, Genesis. All right. Scale of 1 to 4. 1 being extremely fearful, 2 being very fearful, 3 being kind of fearful, 4 being not fearful at all. Okay? 1 is the most, 4 is the least. Think about these things and kind of consider 1 through 4 of your fearful level. First one, bees. Anybody extremely fearful of bees? Anybody extremely allergic to bees? Okay. Sharks. Anybody extremely fearful of sharks? Very fearful. Some most fearful. Yeah, I think so. All right, here's maybe a little better one. Dentists. Anybody extremely fearful of dentists? Just don't like them at all? Maybe not all fearful. Heights. Absolutely scared to death of heights. No, not really. Roller coasters. Some of y'all probably not been on a roller coaster in a while, have you? What about taxi cabs or public transit, buses and stuff like that, subway? We don't have subway around here. If you go to New York City, you don't have a subway. Potential there to be kind of worried about some things. Elevators, that's 1. Escalators, things like that. The next time that you get to see Uncle Tim and Annette, whenever they're going to need to ask them about their escalator escapade that happened to me down in Gatlinburg. It's interesting. Does anybody want to tell us something today that they're really, really scared of? Snakes? Snakes? Spiders? When I was little, I was terrified of frogs. Hated frogs. We used to keep frogs in our pool and catch them and throw them at me and I would scream. It used to be absolutely terrified of them. Anything else that's just absolutely terrifying? You think of, or you see, you're in the other direction. 1 through 4, where would you put yourself in if the scale of 1 to 4, where would you stand on that scale if the Lord was the topic? I'm going to have to answer that one. And how is our fear of the Lord different from our fear of bees, snakes, spiders, roller coasters, the dentist, so on and so forth? Hopefully the fear of the Lord is based more on respect and reverence, right, than it is on actually being scared of something or being uncertain or feeling uneasy when that thing is around. Fear, or I guess the lack thereof, is pretty apparent today in this account that we're going to be looking at over the next couple of weeks. And as we look through chapters 18 and 19, there's a challenge here of us having the fear of God and not the big, bad, scary man fear, but a fear of the reverence and a fear of the word reverence and respect to what or who God is and what He can do for us. Suppose that, in the next 5 or 10 minutes, a historical figure that you know, or that maybe pretty famous, shows up in here, unannounced, comes walking through the doors, and walks in and sits down. What historical figure do you think would cause the greatest amount of fear among all of us? Anybody in this historical figure that walk in here that you'd be scared of?
I'd rather not see Hitler.
I was thinking, yeah, I wouldn't do it more. Yeah, Mussolini, those guys that just absolutely hates what we believe. What? Genghis Khan was another one that would be scared to death of. They could walk in here. just evil, right? And they're evil and uncertain. We don't know what they would do, right? Or what they would have their henchmen that would be with them do, or whatever the case may be. Visitors show up at Abraham and Sarah's house here in two different accounts. And they're unannounced, and it kind of has two different settings here that these visitors show up. But a lack of fear of God here becomes very apparent in both of these instances where these unannounced visitors show up. And as we kind of look at these things, these two accounts and things that we're going to kind of look at within these accounts, maybe considers us to reconsider maybe or our own fear or reverence of God. Okay? Genesis chapter 17 that we finished up last week reaffirmed the covenant that God and Abraham had, or that God gave to Abraham. And we changed last week. Now we can call Abram Abraham because God changed his name to Abraham. You know, we went from Abram, the exalted father, to Abraham, the father of multitudes. Circumcision was the sign of the covenant that between God and Abraham. God also changed Sarai's name to Sarah, the mother of nations is what Sarah means. And Sarah was going to become the mother, of the promised seed that God had promised to Abraham, and therefore become the mother of many, many kings and nations, and so on and so forth. Okay? Now, Sarah at this point is how old? In her 90s, right? Oh, she's an older lady. And so the seed has been promised, Abraham being right at 100. But God had told him it was going to happen. God did not, though, in the midst of all this, bypass Abraham's other son, Ishmael. He made a great nation from Ishmael as well. But the Abrahamic covenant itself was perpetuated through Isaac, that's a good way to put it, not through Ishmael. So Genesis chapter 17, which we finished up, was essentially kind of the essential link between the rest of the history that we're going to see over the next 20 or so chapters in Genesis. Okay, it's kind of the setup here of what's going on. All right, so that brings us to chapter 18, and this lesson's titled No Laughing Matter. And we see here God showing up and visiting Abraham in these first 8 verses. And what we see is the hospitality here that Abraham has when God shows up. So let's read down through the first 8 verses. Let's read through them first, and we'll go back in and kind of break each one of them down like we always do. All right, verse 1, chapter 18 of the Genesis. And the Lord appeared, unto him in the plains of Mamre, and he sat in the tent door in the heat of the day. And he lifted up his eyes and looked, and lo, 3 men stood by him. And when he saw them, he ran to meet them from the tent door and bowed himself toward the ground. And he said, My Lord, if now I have found favor in thy sight, pass not away, I pray thee, from thy servant. Let a little water, I pray you, be fetched, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will fetch a morsel of bread, and comfort ye your hearts, after that ye shall pass on. For therefore are ye come to your servant. And they said, So do as thou hast said. And Abraham hastened into the tent unto Sarah, and said, Make ready quickly 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, and make cakes upon the hearth. And Abraham ran unto the herd, fetched a calf tender and good, and gave it to a young man, and hastened to dress it. And he took butter and milk in the calf which he had dressed, and set it before them, and stood by them under the tree, and they did eat. So we see now, first 8 verses here, that after the Lord now has appeared to Abraham back in chapter 17 to reaffirm his promise of the land of Canaan and his promise of descendants, he shows up again and appears to Abraham again here in the first 2 verses of chapter 18. Now, the visit was timely. Okay, there was a very specific reason for the time of the day when this whole visit took place. Okay? We see now that not just the Lord showed up, but there were two other men with him, more than likely accompanied by two angels, and shows up here with Abraham to meet Abraham when Abraham was 99 years old. Okay. Now, Abraham at 99 had been told this promise that he was going to inherit all this stuff, but even now he still hadn't officially inherited the land of Canaan. God showed it to him, walked him through it, showed him all the stuff that was in there, but hadn't actually given it to him, or hadn't actually officially inherited any of the land of Canaan yet. So, a pilgrim and a stranger here, Abraham was living in a tent. Right? That's what we see in verse 18, or chapter 18, verse 1, that when the Lord and they show up here, that he's actually Abraham's in his tent, because he doesn't have an actual home yet. Okay, he's still a kind of pilgrim, kind of traveling around type. And he was looking, or in this tent, over in Hebrews, let's just turn it, kind of help. Hebrews chapter 11. Kind of help make it a little more, I think, better than I just can tell you. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 10. Let's go to verse 8. Let's get context here. By faith, Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed, and he went out, not knowing whither he went. By faith he sojourned in the land of his promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, their heirs, with him in the same promise. Verse 10, for he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God. Okay, so Abraham at 99 had been given this promise, but he had not yet seen it come to fruition. Okay, so he is looking for the place, looking for being faithful to God and doing all these things, but he technically not had inherited anything yet. All right, so Abraham, in the heat of the day, high noon, is sitting in his tent, and these three men kind of start walking down the road towards Abraham's tent. All right. And he's sitting there, and Abraham, he looks up, and he sees these three guys coming, and Abraham sees them walking down the road, and maybe this is just a Lanciism here, a speculation, maybe perhaps he's the promise here of the son that God had given him is on his mind, and he's there kind of dwelling on it and thinking about it, and he looks up and sees these guys coming down the road, whatever may have kind of clicked off in his head. So he was there, and he saw them, and was very, very hospitable to them, okay? Because don't know that necessarily to be the case, but we can see that the hospitality here that Abraham has is not just, come on in, y'all, sit for a spell. This is over the top, right? He was being very, very overly hospitable to these three men. He runs out to meet them, right, and takes off. And you can see in verse 2, he lifted his eyes and looked, and those three men stood by him, and where he saw them, what did he do? He ran to them. This is a 99-year-old man, right, running out there to meet these three individuals, and made sure to tell them to sit down, that they were going to rest for a while. He was going to take care of them. It was hot, and he could kind of sit for a spell, and he was making sure that he went to get water to offer to wash their feet. Told them he was going to fetch them a snack, right, a morsel of bread. And as we read down through verse 7, that snack, that morsel of bread turns into a what? Yeah, full-on feast, right? It's absolutely just a full spread of food for these guys. So it would appear here that Abraham thinks that this visit from these three individuals was very, very important, right? Very, very big deal, that these three guys were here. The visit was providential, even if Abraham did not know that one of these men were the angel of the Lord, pre-incarnate Christ, okay? So if we're going to characterize the treatment here of Abraham to these travelers, he is being very, 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 very hospitable. Very, very nice to them. Three guys that he didn't know, they were strangers. He was making sure he is taking care of it. Why would Abraham, God's specially chosen man here, call himself a servant like he did in verse 7? What's he communicating kind of about his attitude toward his visitors?
Humility and respect.
Humility and respect. Okay? And what's the reason for that? It's 100% spot on. But what's the reason for it? What is he demonstrating? His humility and respect is demonstrating what?
Submission.
To who? Submission to, exactly. Right? So him going over the top, him telling these guys, whatever you need, I'm here for you. I'll stand over here. I'll be off to the side, but I'm not going to leave in case you have a need. I will make sure that it is taken care of. So him calling himself a servant and being so willing to do whatever these three individuals needed was showing his submission to God. He's communicating here an attitude of humility and communicating, an attitude of great reverence, right? As these men ate and enjoyed this feast in verse 8, we see he took butter and milk of a calf which had dressed and set it before them. He lays it down in front of them, and he goes over and stands off to the side by the tree while they were eating. So he's there ready to take care of whatever need they may have. Okay? So the Lord shows up here to Abraham right in the heat of the day, right when the absolute hottest. He had dirty feet that were in need of a wash. They were in need of food, they were in need of water, and they were in need of rest as well. Why do you think the Lord showed up to Abraham in these type of conditions? What's the reasoning that God shows up to Abraham in these types of conditions?
To watch his faithfulness.
To watch his faithfulness. Okay. What else? Any other reason you think? Give him a test to see what he would do. Okay. Anything else? This is what I think. I think that he showed up into these conditions in the heat of the day to show Abraham how important this journey was, right? Not just anybody's going to come walking a great distance when it's the absolute hottest part of the day if they just need to borrow some flour, right? Or they just need to something kind of insignificant. It's very, very, very important. You're going to make sure that it doesn't matter how hot it is or how tired you are, you're going to make sure you go and do what you need to do. He wanted to show everybody that we're going to walk a great distance in the heat of the day because this trip, him meeting Abraham, was of the utmost importance. Okay? Nothing was going to stop God and the men that were with him to get him to Abraham. And he came under these conditions to show him just how important it was that they were there. Okay? Now, these strangers had Abraham saw were running out to meet them. So these strangers had not yet seen Sarah, right? Verse 9. And they said unto him, Where is Sarah thy wife? And he said, Behold, in the tent. Now, if Abraham didn't know that these people were important beforehand, he probably does now, right? Because these three strangers just showed up, and Abraham met them out on the road, and after they eat or whatever, they look at Abraham and say, not just where's your wife, where's Sarah, your wife, right? They already know her name. They know, one, that he's married, and secondly, that she has the name, and they know what her name is. So, if Abraham, I'm assuming by the way Abraham is treating these people, he already was treating the Lord, he already knew that who this was. If he didn't, he does now for sure. Because just nobody would just automatically just kind of known Sarah's name like that. Now, Abraham could not have known that the Lord was about to make a significant promise that directly involved Sarah, and Sarah would not have known that one of these visitors was the Lord. Okay, so it says, where's Sarah at? She's back in the tent. And we get to verse 9, and we see Sarah's doubt. So, again, verse 9, he tells these three visitors that she's back in the tent, and she's probably in her bedroom, right in their bedroom, her private compartment that she's in behind the flap of the tent. But she's there and she's probably listening. Well, we know she's listening more than likely to the conversation. Okay? Because you got to think, she was there minding her own business. Abraham comes sprinting back into the tent, tells her to get some bread made, and he's running out getting calves slaughtered and dressed up, and he's running out the crazy man making sure all this stuff is taken care of for these three visitors. So I'm sure she's curious, why in the world is he creating such a fuss over these three guys that are here? So she's probably there as they're eating, kind of hidden, listening to their conversation, wanting to know why he is acting kind of the way that he is. Verse 10, and he said, I will certainly return unto thee according to the time of life. And lo, Sarah thy wife shall have a son. And Sarah heard it in the tent door which she was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old and well stricken in age, and it ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. Therefore Sarah laughed within herself, saying, After I am waxed old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord, being old also. So, we hear now that whereas Sarah, Abraham says she's in the tent, and the Lord here goes on in verses 10, 11 to explain exactly what's kind of going to happen. Okay? Now, she hears this Lord saying this, and what was it that Sarah thought was so funny? What was she laughing to herself about? That she was going to have this 89-year-old woman, 9-year-old woman was going to be able to have a baby. Okay? And she laughed either in herself or she thought that this was very, very funny. And what is the reaction here from Sarah? What reaction does that show about her view of God? What does Sarah's reaction show about her view of God?
She didn't have the relationship that Abraham had.
Yes. Okay. What else?
She was obviously starting to doubt that it would happen.
Yes, she was obviously starting to doubt. Her faith was not as strong as Abraham's was. She obviously was starting to doubt here. She saw God as less than he said that he was able to do. She saw God as less than being able to do, actually not being able to live up to the expectations, live up to what God said that he was going to do. Sarah's age here of 90 years old, I mean, it's easy to see why she was cynical about this. It's easy to see why she thought there was absolutely no way that this could happen. This is impossible to her in her mind. She's, understands that there's no possible physical way this could take place. And it hasn't been able to now for several years. So we get it. We see the cynical nature of the notion of Abraham, or excuse me, Sarah, and we even can understand why she thinks of the way that she does. So we see her laughing kind of silently to herself, kind of having a chuckle to herself. Yeah, he says this, but there's no way this can happen. Okay? Verse 13. And the Lord said unto Abraham, Wherefore did Sarah laugh, saying, Shall I of surety bear a child which am old? So as Sarah, let's just kind of think of Sarah's behind the tent. They know that she's in the tent. She doesn't think they know, to them, out of sight, out of mind, right? That's kind of what's going on here. And she's listening to this, and the Lord says, Abraham, your wife's going to bear a child, and Sarah laughs to herself, like we all laugh. We know what Sarah did here. It wasn't an audible laugh, it was a chuckle to herself. Kind of always shaking her head and rolling her eyes, but it was completely silent. And she's probably still in the midst of this laughter, right, to herself. And she hears this guy outside say, Hey, Abraham, Sarah laughing. And you can kind of see Sarah going, right, and just stop. Everything just stops. Her whole everything, it freezes her. Because we know, and now Sarah understands, and probably even Abraham even more so, gets the whole idea of exactly what's happening, because the Lord knows our inner thoughts, right? He knows even the silent things that we think of. And he heard Sarah's laugh because he already knew those things. And he asked Abraham, "Why is Sarah laughing?" And he goes on to verse 14 and says this, Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the time appointed, I will return to thee according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. Sarah must have been shocked, right? Absolutely shocked to learn that her silent laughter, her unspoken thoughts and doubts were heard and read and known by one of these visitors. Especially since the visitors had to ask Abraham where she was even at. Even though she did not know the Lord himself was present, she had to be conscious of the supernaturalness, I guess that's a word, of this event that took place. Who but God could have known these things? Go to verse 15. Then Sarah denied, saying, I laughed not, for she was afraid. And he said, Nay, but thou didst laugh. So Sarah's laughing to herself. She knows, she hears this guy say, why is she laughing? And then her instant response is to do what? Lie. And say, well, it wasn't me, I wasn't laughing. It wasn't me. Right? This reminds me of 16-year-old kids that I could have in class, and I see one of them cheating on a test, and they think they're getting away with it, and then I just kind of walk by and say, stop cheating, and it's like, I wasn't cheating. It didn't happen. This is what Sarah did right here. Okay? And why do you think, right? Why do you think that Sarah denied the fact that she laughed? Why was her response so quick? I wasn't me, I wasn't laughing. I just heard her. Why?
Because she realized who he was.
Realized who she was, she was scared to death. She was afraid. Right? We see here that she is afraid. Now, the fear that she has, it's not in reverence. The fear that she had is not a respectful fear. It was a cowering, oh no, I just got caught fear. She lied about her laughter because she's ashamed of it. Right? And was fearful of what consequences or retributions might happen because of the way that she reacted. And just like all of us, she thought that denying that it even happened would simply just make the problem go away. I didn't do it. So I'm on top of that. Wasn't me. This is somebody else you heard. Thought denying it would make it simply go away. Pretty foolish thought, especially that the Lord, this guy here, had just proven that he could read her mind, right? And that he could see her thoughts. Now, how easy we find it here to be like to admit our faithlessness. Self-defense, more often than not, is the immediate reaction that we have. We're afraid to be honest with ourselves. We're afraid to be honest with others. Sinful fear, therefore, is something to be afraid of. Sinful fear led Sarah to deceit. Sinful fear led Sarah to lie about what she had just done. It also caused King Saul, back in 1 Samuel chapter 15, to compromise God's command to slay all the Amalekites and their cattle. Right? But he got worried that his own people didn't want them to do that, so he didn't. Fear caused Peter to deny the Lord. As 2 Timothy 1:7 says, but God hath not given us the spirit of fear. Right? The Holy Spirit will enable us to frankly and openly say, yeah, I did. I sinned. Now, let's, as we finish up, let's say that Sarah had a little different response to this. Let's say that when Sarah heard that she was going to have this child, that she did indeed still chuckle. Totally understandable. Showed that she had some doubt, but it's totally understandable that she would do that. But let's say that when Sarah was called out on it, right, that when God said, why is Sarah laughing? Let's say that her response would have been, yeah, you're right. say that Sarah had that response instead of the response of denying and trying to lie about it. Do you think that if she had openly admitted that she had done this and trying to cover it up, do you think that, because Sarah's response should have been, yeah, I messed up, but it's kind of hard for me to understand, but now I can see the forest for the tree. But of course, that wasn't the case. Maybe she was hoping that denying her laughter would cause the Lord to simply just drop the subject. I know we do that too. We sometimes deny our sins and cover it up, hoping that others or even God won't bring it up. But God did not do that with Sarah. He rebukes her, as we see in verse 15. And Sarah denied, saying, I laugh not, for she was afraid. And he said, oh no, yeah, you did laugh. You can tell me that you didn't, but you did because I heard you. If Sarah would have just owned up to it here, then she wouldn't have been rebuked. Probably wouldn't have been rebuked. Probably had a good lesson for her here, but she wouldn't have been rebuked by it. But he does not cast her aside. He continues to show grace and mercy to her as he does to us. Because thankfully, God is not an individual who very easily gives up on his people. Right? He's patient, he's loving, and he's concerned for us. Because in due time, Sarah here is going to learn what it means to have a reverential maybe, I think, a reverencing fear of God. And we'll see that kind of coming later on. So Sarah's view here, and we're going to see that we got a few more things coming. What's funny for Sarah here was the fact that, you know, she would have a son in her old age because she saw God as less than he was, and not able to do what he said he could. Next week, we're going to jump into verse 16, and we see a second part of this little visit here, the Lord's plan to judge Sodom and Gomorrah, and of course, Lot and his daughters over there, and all the stuff that kind of happens as well. So we'll get into more of that next week. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the lesson we have here. Thank you for showing us and using Sarah's mistakes as an example for us that even in the midst of faithlessness and doubt, that when we get called on it, it's better for us to just own the sin, own the mistake, accept the punishment for the mistake instead of trying to deny and deflect and make you forget about it. Sarah here is trying to make you forget about the fact that she just seen him and you just recognize the whole thing is pretty preposterous and what she's trying to do, but it's the exact same thing that we do. We know that we're going to make mistakes. We know that's going to happen. We try to avoid those. We try to limit those, but when those do come, because we're imperfect, I pray that you remind us that we have the boldness and the wherewithal to just own up to where we messed up. So we can correct it, we can fix it, we can move forward and not make the same mistake again. That's the desire and the challenge of our hearts this morning.